The Mothman of Point Pleasant is one of the most infamous cryptids ever recorded. Since the 1960s, hundreds of people each year have claimed to encounter it, most with one thing in common: the appearance of this creature is soon followed by a tragedy. Like the Banshee in Celtic folklore before it, the Mothman has taken up residency in popular culture as a bad omen, a bizarre entity that brings with it a slew of paranormal as well as supernatural phenomena. And if you're unlucky enough to see it, you may not make it out alive. Though disasters have been attributed to this creature, the question remains: is it trying to warn us, or is it the cause of unimaginable death and suffering? Although the Mothman has been sighted elsewhere, it first rose to prominence in the sleepy town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. With a population of just over 4,000 and sitting in the idyllic surroundings in a vast valley where the Ohio and Kanawha rivers meet, its residents have stories to tell that are strange and frightening. The town has had an unusual number of disasters associated with it. Many of these have been directly connected to the landscape. In fact, early settlers who explored the area tried to avoid what would go on to become Point Pleasant because superstition and folklore suggest that bad things happen where the two rivers meet. The records of accidents in the area go back hundreds of years, but they seem to have escalated in the early 1900s. Between 1914 and 1937, the Ohio River rose up against the town residents on 4 different occasions, flooding the area, causing untold damage and killing many. Some believe that it's almost as if the landscape itself doesn't want the people to live there, and that the strange entities that would later become synonymous with the area were manifested by supernatural forces embedded deep in the terrain. During this time of regular disasters, residents and travelers began to see something strange in the sky above the Ohio River. It was labeled as the Birdman, and it was said to be larger than a full-grown man, humanoid in shape, but with large red feathered wings that glistened strangely in the sunlight. The fact that this creature was spotted during the day as well as at night suggests that residents really were seeing something. Observation is far more reliable during the daylight hours, of course. But what's striking about these sightings is that they were recorded up to 50 years before the most famous encounters with the Mothman. Even more unnerving, just like the Mothman's characteristics as a portent of death and tragedy, the Birdman was associated with appearing immediately before or after a terrible event. It's important then to understand that the famous sightings of the Mothman in the mid to late 1960s are grounded in a long history of similar creatures being seen in the vicinity of Point Pleasant. The question is, are these creatures undiscovered animals, or do they have supernatural origins? The first notable sighting of the Mothman occurred in August of 1966. A Point Pleasant resident by the name of Lawrence Gray and his wife were returning from church when Lawrence had an inexplicable feeling. As he stood on the steps of his home, he felt in the pit of his stomach that someone had broken into his house while they had been out. After searching his house from top to bottom, the only thing amiss was that the latch on his basement was unlocked. That night, Lawrence was having a restless dream when he awoke to find a 6-foot-tall figure standing next to his bed. It had deep-set eyes, large wings, and the color of old yellowed paper. When Lawrence recited a piece of scripture in his mind, the thing disappeared, but he was left traumatized by the experience. Due to his religious background, Lawrence believed that he had seen the devil himself, but it's difficult not to see this as an early Mothman sighting, considering the description he gave of the creature. Whatever he saw, he would not be the last witness, not by a long shot. On November 1st, 1966, a National Guardsman was working in the area when he saw something staring at him up in a nearby tree. On closer inspection, the thing in the tree almost seemed human, but with large wings stretched out from its body. This second sighting started a pattern. Many of those who claimed to see or encounter the shadowy winged creature prowling the area were well-respected professionals who seemed genuinely puzzled by what they had seen. This was followed by a sighting in Clendenin, a town an hour away from Point Pleasant, where 4 gravediggers were disturbed while digging a grave in the evening by something flying directly above them. They reported what they saw as a flying man with large wings. Linda and Roger Scarberry gave possibly the most famous account of the Mothman. On the night of the 15th of November, they quickly contacted the local police with one of the most detailed sightings on record. The 2 teenagers were joyriding near an abandoned power plant outside of town with another young couple when their headlights reflected off of something in the darkness. It was 2 red dots. The couple were horrified by what they had seen. They quickly realized that the red dots were glowing eyes, and they were looking directly at them. A 7-foot-tall figure with large wings was standing by the side of the road. It had gray skin and was humanoid with large wings. Terrified, they sped off only to realize that the creature was flying directly overhead as if hunting them. The figure would fly close and then disappear, only to reappear again over and over to the rear of the car. The teenagers were only able to get away from their pursuer when they got back into town. It stopped chasing them as they headed into a more populated area. Over the next year, many Point Pleasant residents would see the same strange creature flying overhead or sitting in large trees, watching the human population below. People were scared of the stories, and there was just one question left on their mind: what did the Mothman want? As if to answer the question, a mysterious individual began to appear around the town. The sightings of the Mothman were fascinating enough, but there were also a large number of incidents involving a strange man who appeared to be something other than human. Due to these encounters happening concurrently with the Mothman sightings, researchers believe that this man is somehow connected to the creature. Some called him the Grinning Man, but he gave his name on more than one occasion as Indrid Cold. With each encounter, this man's appearance seemed to change. For example, one of the earliest sightings described him as being tall, with no nose or ears. Later, he would slowly appear to be more and more human until he was indistinguishable from the real thing. A sewing machine salesman named Woodrow Durenberger was visited by Indrid Cold several times, and he believed that the man was not of this earth. Around the same time, a young girl called Linda Lilly claimed to be experiencing what would later be labeled as poltergeist activity. Objects were moving around on their own and strange knocking sounds were heard around her home, and the parents were at a loss as to why. One night, Linda awoke to see a strange man standing in her bedroom. She couldn't see his face very well, but she could see enough to know that he was grinning at her. The man walked over to the side of the bed where Linda was lying and leaned over her. When Linda screamed and hid under her blanket, the man was gone. Countless other strange incidents were reported at this time in and around Point Pleasant, including lights in the sky and classic UFO sightings. There's a lot to unpack with this case, but it seems that from November 1966 until the end of 1967, Point Pleasant played host to either powerful supernatural forces or hysteria. Fear began to grow throughout the area, and residents became terrified of Indrid Cold and the associated strange phenomena. It was said that he tended to appear at night and when a person was alone and vulnerable. Sometimes he would pursue people, other times he would simply grin and intimidate, while other times he started strange conversations about the world itself in which we live. UFO expert John Keel became interested in this imposing grinning figure and its Mothman counterpart. After speaking with Woodrow Durenberger about his meetings with the Grinning Man, Keel began to receive phone calls from someone claiming to be the sinister Indrid Cold himself. This would lead Keel further down the rabbit hole, walking the streets and locations of Point Pleasant where the Mothman and Cold had been seen, hoping to understand what they were and what they wanted. Soon, Keel came to believe that he was being followed by an unknown individual and that something truly dangerous had entered the lives of everyone in the town. Something bad was going to happen. He could feel it in his bones. Keel and others turned to the history of Point Pleasant in an attempt to solve this riddle. If the Mothman and Indrid Cold were supernatural beings, what could explain their appearance? Is there anything about the town of Point Pleasant that could explain where they came from and what they wanted? Reading through the records and archives of the area, it doesn't take long to find chapters of Point Pleasant history some would love to forget. During the 1760s and 1770s, the leader of the indigenous Shawnee tribe was forced to defend his people from European settlers. His name was Hakolsqua, and he led several indigenous groups into the Battle of Point Pleasant. It was a bloodbath with heavy losses on both sides. As the Shawnee warriors had to retreat back across the River Ohio, they were forced to throw the dead bodies of their comrades into the water. An uneasy peace was then agreed upon, with the European settlers staking claim to much of the Shawnees' land. But in October of 1777, Hakolsqua visited an American fort that had been built on the site of the original battle. He came in friendship to ask why 2 Shawnee members were being imprisoned there. The fort's commander, Matthew Arbuckle, decided to detain Hakolsqua for no good reason. Just a few days later, on November 10th, a militiaman who was posted at the fort was killed by unknown Shawnee warriors. In retribution, Hakolsqua and his friends were brutally murdered at the fort. As he lay dying, it's said that Hakolsqua cursed Point Pleasant and all who lived there. Some locals believe that Hakolsqua's curse either manifested or attracted the Mothman to the region. He was buried at the fort without honoring his people's traditions. It wasn't until 1840 when his remains were rediscovered and exhumed. But again, they were not given back to his people. Instead, they were reburied on the grounds of the Mason County Courthouse. Finally, when the courthouse was torn down in 1954, Hakolsqua found his final resting place, buried alongside both his enemies and allies in Tuendiwi State Park. It was where a monument to the Battle of Point Pleasant now stands. If the curse theory is true, then perhaps it was exacerbated in 1954 when his bones were moved yet again to a place not of his own choosing. In Shawnee mythology, a giant bird called the Waputhi is said to roam the skies. Interestingly, in some traditions, the Waputhi is depicted as a man with wings and is said to speak backwards. Could Indrid Cold and the Mothman had been a Waputhi brought to avenge the treatment of the Hakolsqua and his people? Whether you believe in such things or not, Point Pleasant undeniably soon went through a terrible event that would forever traumatize the local community. The event remains a central pillar to most Mothman theories, even today. Across the rest of 1967, the Mothman and Indrid Cold were sighted again and again. 5 separate pilots stated that they had seen a bird as large as an airplane in the sky with them. Another resident of Point Pleasant described how he saw a creature that looked like a gargoyle standing on his lawn. Some of the most disturbing sightings involved people waking up to see a red-eyed humanoid face staring in through bedroom windows at the people while they slept. The sightings increased again and again, and the town became permanently gripped by anxiety. All of these things seem to have been heading somewhere, but the true tragedy that occurred came out of nowhere. During rush hour traffic on the 15th of December 1967, the Silver Bridge that ran between Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the town of Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed. The bridge had stood proudly since 1928, but on that day, it suddenly failed. With the bridge packed with cars and other vehicles, a single eye-bar broke, snapping the suspension chain in half. Without this, a huge section of the bridge collapsed into the water. When the vehicles plunged into the icy water below, 46 people tragically lost their lives. 44 bodies were recovered, 2 were not, including the body of a little girl. As the town and the surrounding areas mourned this terrible tragedy, sightings of both the Mothman and Indrid Cold all but ceased for many years. And yet, over time from the late 1970s onwards, people began to cite the strange flying humanoid creature again, though not nearly as much. Since then, the Mothman has been the subject of books, films, and documentaries. It's a fascinating story, and what the people of Point Pleasant went through, regardless if it was supernatural or not, has left a deep impression on those interested in the stranger side of life. So, what are we to make of the Mothman and all of these bizarre associated phenomena? Skeptics believe that it's the perfect case study for hysteria and how stories can be spun over time to create fear in large populations. These days, the residents of Point Pleasant have embraced the story, hosting an annual Mothman festival that's visited by enthusiasts from all over the world. John Keel continued to investigate Mothman sightings until the day he died. But by the end, he had come to a more comfortable conclusion about what had gone on. He believed that the Mothman was something truly alien to humanity, a creature that was, if not extraterrestrial, of an unearthly origin, and may have been interacting with human beings throughout history. While some argue that the creature causes the tragedies its appearances are linked to, John Keel believed strongly that the creature somehow had insight about what will happen in the future and wants to actually warn people against their oncoming demise. Because its mind was so vastly different from ours, communication is almost impossible. And what of Injured Cold? Was he the product of imagination, a real man, or something else? What was his connection to the Mothman? Could he have somehow been another form of the same creature? There's no way to tell just yet, unless he appears again, of course, grinning and telling us of the doom that waits for us all. Be sure to tune in every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for brand new content from me. And remember to follow me on Discord and Twitch, as well as my team who make these videos possible. You'll find all of their respective links in the description below this video. Thanks for watching.